Sabre rattling in the Gulf. As Israel appears to prepare for a strike, Iran holds its guns. Is it war or psychological warfare? What is the likely impact of this tension on the handling of the Iranian nuclear issue and stability in the Gulf? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm David Foster. It is only the second trip by a Joint Chiefs Chairman to Israel in more than a decade taking place right now. Last December, Admiral Mike Mullen visited Israel in the wake of an attack last September by Israeli warplanes on a building in northern Syria. This time, the visit raises more worries about an imminent strike on Iran. Mohammed Shakir has more.
The visit by U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Admiral Mike Mullen to Israel is one more indication that the two countries are actively discussing a military strike on Iran. It boosts speculation that Israel was seeking U.S. approval for a possible attack on Tehran. Mullen's trip followed news earlier this month that the Israeli Air Force carried out a major exercise involving 100 fighter jets backed by mid-air fuel tankers flying some 1,500 kilometers westward over the Mediterranean Sea, roughly the same distance as eastward from Israel to Iran's nuclear facilities. The visit coincides with the Times newspaper on Sunday, quoting defense sources that Iran has moved its ballistic missiles into launch positions, with Israel's Dimona nuclear plant among possible targets. The movement of Shihab 3B missiles, which have an estimated range of more than 2,000 kilometers, also coincided with strong statements by the commander of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, Major General Mohammad Jafari, to a Tehran daily on Saturday that Israel is completely within the range of the Islamic Republic's missile.
Our missile power and capability are such that the Zionist regime, despite all its abilities, cannot confront it.
The statement was confirmed by Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, the chairman of the Assembly of Experts and the Expediency Council of Iran.
If we assume that they took this initiative and carried out this foolish attack, I am confident the Israelis will regret having committed such an act.
In the midst of this tension, neighboring countries feel caught in the middle, heading to a war. Even if Iran has stopped developing a weapons program, as the U.S. intelligence said late last year, it seems that a confrontation is inevitable unless Iran gives up its nuclear ambitions completely, which under the current regime is highly unlikely. Mohammed Shakir for Inside Story.
Well, joining us now from Tehran, Professor Saeed Mohammad Marandi, Head of North American Studies at Tehran University. In Tel Aviv, Dr. Raanan Gissin, an advisor to the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. And in Washington, D.C., Dr. Hilary Mann-Leverett, Chief Exec of Strategic Energy and Global Analysis and former Director of Persian Gulf Affairs at the White House. Thanks very much to all three of you. Dr. Leverett, first of all, your estimation of what any attack on Iran would do to world oil supply and prices.
Well, I think it would have a serious disruptive impact. Right now, we see the price of oil at about $140 a barrel, with an increase continuing to be likely. If you had an attack on Iran, you would both face an increase in the speculative pressures on the price of oil, plus a potential real supply disruption. Right now, the price of oil probably should be, in terms of its marginal cost, closer to $60 or $70 a barrel. The rest of that, the increment between the $60 and $70 a barrel to the $140, is basically speculation and the weakness of the U.S. dollar. It's not supply issues. If you add an attack on Iran, you would add a supply issue.
I'm going to say it could be a supply issue. Yeah, if they close the Straits of Hormuz, 40% of the world's oil goes through there.
Right. I mean, what you're dealing with right now is a tremendous you're dealing with a tremendous price fluctuation because of speculation and the weakness of the dollar. If you added to that a real serious significant disruption in supply, you're probably looking at oil going past even $250 a barrel.
Dr. Gissin, in Tel Aviv, with the military exercises over Greece, as we reported, exactly the same distance for the planes to have to fly as if they were going into Iran. With those exercises and also with the visit by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, what is Israel doing? Is it realistically preparing for an attack or ramping up the rhetoric?
Well, let me just remind you that chairmen of Joint Chiefs of Staff visited Israel before, as you rightly mentioned in the report, about more than 10 years ago, when Colin Powell was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff before the first Gulf War, and that was intended to prevent Israel from actually participating in the war, to restrain Israel rather than having, launch an attack against the Scud missile. So, you can look at it from both sides. There's no doubt that both Israel and the United States and any party concerned prepares for all the options. How did President Bush say? All the options are on the table, and I should say some come from the air. That's for sure. But I think it's more important. It's more important, and I think that what is being done today, apart from the fact that this is part of a psychological warfare, saber rattling, muscle flexing, as you said, it's more important to understand that the message that Israel tries to provide through all these bits of information that come out, it's the urgency of the need of the European community, the Arab Gulf states, to take concerted effort and join the coalition to impose, I would say, effective sanctions on Iran. There's still time to do it now.
All right, I want to pick up on a point.
There will be a military option.
A point you made at the beginning, that Colin Powell visited Israel to urge restraint. Now, it's suggested that Mike Mullen, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, is against military action. It's suggested too that Robert Gates, the defense secretary, is in the same camp. Could he have been doing that, saying, listen, we're a bit worried about what Israel's doing, hold on?
Well, right. Well, there's ongoing dialogue and very, I would say, intensive strategic dialogue between Israel and the United States, not just on the Iranian issue, on global terrorism, on the situation in Lebanon, Hezbollah, on Gaza and Hamas. All these fall into the same mold. We have very strong strategic ties with the United States. There's no doubt that Israel listens to what the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says, and we take that into consideration. But one must understand that if other options fail, and the last option left to Israel is to defend itself only by its own means, then Israel wants to show that it is ready to do that. However, the preferred option is what I mentioned, the sanctions.
I'm going to bring in Professor Marandi in Tehran at this point. Not heard from you so far. I'm wondering what the Iranian regime made of the Israeli military exercises over Greece.
Well, I don't think that the government really thinks that Israel, the Zionist regime, is contemplating a military action seriously for a couple of reasons. One is because they wouldn't be announcing it, or they wouldn't allow it to be told to the media if they really wanted to carry it out at this stage. And secondly, they also know that, and the Iranians know, that in order for them to carry out any attack, they would have to go past American aircraft in Iraq, the American Navy in the region, or through Turkey, where the American Air Force also exists. So it would have to be done with the consent of the Americans. And if that is the case, then the Americans would be considered a part of the attack, and they would have to suffer the consequences. I think that the Iranians have said explicitly that any attack on Iran there will be a robust reply. And I think that the potential for oil prices to go even way above $250 a barrel is there. So I don't think that the Americans or the Israeli regime at this point really seriously is contemplating such action.
When it comes to sanctions, as Dr. Gissin suggested, that's what this might be about, what are the type of sanctions that Iran is most worried about perhaps having imposed on it? Would it be not being allowed perhaps to export its oil?
Definitely not. I mean, Iran right now, if it decides not to export oil, the oil market will go through the roof. They need Iranian oil. Therefore, really, sanctions beyond what has already been imposed, it will be counterproductive. And as the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament said just recently, as well as Mr. Rafsanjani, from here on, Iran is going to play hardball. So I don't think that it will be in the interests of the United States or the UN Security Council to really go any further than this, because Iran is very serious about the situation, and it will, according to the statements made by leaders in Iran, respond in a very strong manner.
All right, well, let me ask you this one then. Iran has also said that it expects allies within the region to come to its aid if there is any kind of attack. Who would it expect to stand by its side?
The amazing thing is that, and I've traveled around in the region, the amazing thing is that throughout the region there's a lot of sympathy for Iran, despite the propaganda campaign being carried out against the country.
No, but specific countries, who would it expect to stand by its side? Name the countries.
I don't think that Iran really is speaking of countries specific. I think what it means is that popular opinion will be on Iran's side, and that will destabilize anyone who is seen to be aligned to the United States or supporting Israel. And I think that the regimes in the region who feel close to the United States will probably feel the wrath of their own people. Such a situation could have implications far, far beyond that which we saw in Lebanon. And it's not just the Middle East, it could be Central Asia. I think that the disruption of oil as well as natural gas supplies could go far beyond the Strait of Hormuz.
A quick thought from you, Dr. Leverett, in Washington, D.C., before we take a short break. If there is an attack and it comes before George, let me rephrase that. Is Israel pushing for some kind of action now because it's a bit worried that come January and a new occupant of the White House, there might not be the same appetite for it?
Well, the concern here in Washington is that with the December 2007, just 6 months ago, the release of the national intelligence estimate here that Iran effectively was not continuing its weaponization program, the concern in Washington is that this has gravely concerned the Israelis, that the Bush administration will not decisively, militarily deal with the Iranian nuclear threat before it leaves office. Then you add to that the perception here in Washington that the Israelis are increasingly concerned that either of the two presidential candidates here in the United States, Barack Obama or John McCain, that either of them, even if they decided that it would be useful to deal decisively militarily with the Iranian nuclear threat, that will take at least a year after they're in office. So the concern here in Washington is that the Israelis may not think that they have potentially 2 years to wait for a military decisive U.S. reaction to the Iranian nuclear program. That's a fundamentally different position that the Israelis are in today than they were a year ago, when the thought here in Washington is that they could count on the U.S. to keep the military option on the table. But effectively, the U.S. has taken the military option off the table, regardless of what George Bush may or may not say. Effectively, that's what's happened.
Fascinating stuff. Listen, we'll talk about a great many other issues in just a moment. We're going to take a short break. We'll be discussing in just a moment the possible ramifications of any confrontation on the Gulf region, asking if the world could tolerate another oil crisis. Do stay with us on Inside Story.